An inclusive playground for kids, an amazing historic district, a fight to save a local species, plus 5G poles for cell service could be coming to an area near you. All this and more as we look at neighborhoods and community on this edition of Connected Colorado. Some changes could be coming to your community. Hi, I'm Wendy Brockman. 5G is the next generation of wireless cell technology. So how will this infrastructure affect our neighborhoods? That's later in the show. But first, a playground all kids can enjoy. It's Aurora's first ever all-inclusive playground, and it all started with the wish of one little boy.
God! I hope that this is just the beginning.
Nearly 2 years ago, Jamie Jenkins and her family set out with a goal.
It's finally here.
That goal?
Party ball!
For her son, Sean, and other kids with disabilities.
This is amazing. This is the first time Miles has ever been on a swing or ever had access to a playground.
And all kids, for that matter, to be able to play together.
There's a lot going on in the world that isn't amazing right now, and it's just good to bring joy and happiness and the simplicity of playing at a park to everybody.
It was a dream that took the support of Make-A-Wish Foundation, the city, and you, an entire community.
Individuals, businesses, corporations, from high school students to large foundations.
Even neighbors, friends, strangers touched by a Sean's wish.
It means the world to me, and to know that people are out here doing these things for these kids.
All because of one little boy's dream, the love of his parents, and support of our community. Red Tail Talk Park is the city's first ever inclusive playground. It's 8,000 square feet and features a wheelchair swing, dual zip lines, all kinds of spinners, and much more. Because here in Aurora, we believe no one should ever have to sit on the sidelines.
Really, all any of us want is to be treated well and included, and the kindergarten golden rule is to treat people how you want to be treated and to not be left out. And hopefully this park can just be like a reminder when you come here to treat each other well and be good people and have fun.
It's such an amazing space, and kids are using it every day. Joining me now is Ken Fellman with Kissinger and Fellman. He is the attorney with the Colorado Communications and Utility Alliance. And the reason we are here, Ken, is to talk about something called 5G small cell technology. Welcome, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We are at an intersection in Denver because you're looking at one of the first 5G cell poles that we're going to be seeing in Colorado. So Ken, what's the difference between this 5G technology and what we have now?
Well, 5G really stands for the fifth generation of wireless technology. Many people are operating on 4G now, and as it develops, 5G technology is supposed to be faster, it's supposed to be more robust, less latency, carry more data. That's the good news.
Sure.
The bad news is that it operates mostly on radio waves that don't carry the signal as far before they need to connect with another facility, which means you're going to have to see a lot of these.
Okay. Yes. And it's called 5G small cell technology, but the poles aren't exactly small, are they?
No, they're not. I'm glad you noticed. The wireless industry and many of our legislators and regulators like to refer to this as small cell, and they have said, and the FCC has said, they've referred to these as with equipment no larger than the size of a pizza box or no larger than the size of a backpack. But in fact, they are anything but small. Again, as you look at it, the base of that pole that we're looking at over here is just about as tall as I am, and I'm 6 feet tall. And the space for 2 sets of antennas on top, that's about 8 feet or so where it gets wide on the top. And there's a whole bunch of equipment on the inside. Even the FCC, they've defined small cell equipment at one site as up to 28 cubic feet of equipment. Now 28 cubic feet, if you Google that, if you go to Google Images and you go to 28 cubic feet, you'll see a bunch of ads for refrigerator freezers. And think of the size of your refrigerator. Think of cutting it up into 4 or 5 pieces and sticking it on the side of a pole. That's not so small. It's pretty large and it can be pretty unsightly. So it's kind of a misnomer, and it's I think, unfortunate that the public has had these facilities represented to them by using that term.
You think it's misleading?
I think it's misleading, yes.
So are we likely to see these 5G poles everywhere in Colorado?
Well, each company has their own deployment plan, but generally, as they've explained it to local governments, what they've said is where they're going first are the high density areas. You'll see them in the cities, you'll see them in the suburban areas, probably the Front Range. We'll see a lot of deployments, again, in the more heavily populated areas. And I'm seeing a bunch of them in the resort communities as well, because those also get heavily populated at varying times of the year.
Like a Breckenridge or a Steamboat or an Aspen kind of thing.
But we're not seeing a lot of it, and we probably won't see much of it for a long time in the more rural parts of the state, even along the Front Range in the more rural parts of Arapahoe County and Douglas County, whether it's on the Eastern Plains or the West Slope. You're not going to see as much deployment out there. Because just like with fiber and wired infrastructure, it costs a lot of money to deploy these networks, and the companies are going to go where they have the most customers.
Right, which means they're more visible there.
That's right.
So is the concept the more you have, the faster and more powerful the service is?
It's not that the more you have, it's that in order for the network to work, and keep in mind the antennas send a signal from one site to the next site, and those larger macro towers, the signals carry further distances, which is why you don't see towers so close together. What they call small cells, these kinds of facilities, they are required to be closer together in order to connect the signal from one antenna to the next antenna. If you have a hole in the center, there's no continual connectivity for the network.
So companies like Verizon and AT&T, can they put these poles wherever they want?
Well, they have engineers who are much smarter than I in network design, determining where they have gaps and where they need to fill in those gaps with network facilities. But as far as authority, it's a very strange and complex mixture of federal and state and local authority. We have a state law in Colorado that allows these kinds of facilities, these small cell facilities, in any zoning district. A city or a county cannot say, we are prohibiting any of these sites in a residential neighborhood. They are allowed in any zoning district. But the cities and the counties have retained the authority to impose police power restrictions, the zoning restrictions, so they can put height limits on them, and they can put design requirements on them. For example, this pole, under Denver's regulations, there are requirements that you don't see a bunch of other equipment hanging off the side of the pole because the equipment's on the inside, and that's done for aesthetic purposes. So there is some regulatory authority that the local governments still have as to where these things can go and how they look, but it is limited by both state law and federal law.
What about cost-wise? Can the cities charge an impact fee or permit fee of some kind?
Well, that's another issue that's up in the air right now. Under Colorado law, cities have always been allowed to charge as fees whatever the amount of money is to recover their costs. So how much you pay the person who processes the permit, if you have to have an inspector come out and make sure the foundation was put in properly, all of those costs can be recovered in the fee structure. Under a new federal regulation, the FCC has set what they call presumed caps, and they basically say anything over a certain amount is presumed to be unreasonable and in excess of those fees. And there's a whole complicated process where it can be challenged, but the FCC has at least tried to preempt and further limit what local governments can charge. And that results in a subsidy where taxpayers are actually having to subsidize some of the costs of managing these kinds of sites.
Any health concerns? Does that come up?
It's a big issue. A lot of citizens are concerned about radiation generally. The FCC, again, under federal law, is the only agency that is allowed to set the standards of what is the maximum amount of emissions that wireless facilities can emit. And there have been studies that suggest that it's safe. There have been studies that suggest that maybe it's not safe. There have been studies that suggest that, well, maybe one site isn't really a problem, but once we start putting hundreds of these throughout neighborhoods, is there a cumulative impact that gets us to an unsafe area? It hasn't been studied enough. I think most of the experts that I've read and spoken with, who I respect, indicate that even though there's no conclusive evidence that it's a problem, that we're also not 100% sure and that more research needs to be done.
Clearly, there's going to be some resistance to this. Have you heard any feedback or reaction so far?
Sure, yeah, there is, and there are many, well, let me back up. Many local governments are updating their codes because, as I mentioned, we do have some land use authority to regulate where these go and what they look like. And some of that has been taken away by state and federal law, and cities and counties are trying to update their regulations so they can at least exercise what authority they do have in today's legal environment. As those public hearings take place for communities updating their codes, I have seen a number of communities where citizens have come out, they've expressed the health concerns, which unfortunately their elected officials have to tell them we can't address those issues because Congress has preempted us. They're also concerned about property values. They're concerned about the aesthetics of how they look. They're concerned about traffic. Is there going to be a need for maintenance? Are we going to have trucks pulling up to maintain these things? So folks do have concern about them. And of course, some people have some concerns, but they also want to see their networks improved. They want to have faster speeds and better network and more capacity. As our homes have more and more wireless devices, there's an incredible increasing demand for these kind of services. And the goal is to figure out a way to balance the network infrastructure that's needed to provide the service and do it in a way that's safe and preserves the integrity of our communities.
So clearly we're only hearing the beginning of this. It's going to evolve, and as people learn more about it, you're encouraging them to get answers from where?
Many of the communities that are working in this area have done a really good job to get information out to the public. Citizens have the opportunity through that vehicle, through other research that they can do. The health issues have been studied. The FCC has pages on their website dealing with radio frequency safety and 5G issues. All of the industry websites have information on this. There's a variety of places they can get information. And for folks who are concerned about the limited regulatory authority that their mayors and council members have, unfortunately, what they really need to do is talk to their members of Congress, because the reason that the mayor and the city council and the board of county commissioners don't have more authority to determine where they go and what they look like is because the federal government has limited that role. And the only way that role is going to expand will be if Congress changes the law.
Wow. All right. So we want the faster technology, but we don't want it to infringe on our personal space.
That's exactly right.
Here we are.
That's right.
All right, Ken. Very complicated issue. Thanks for helping us break it down. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, one of our great neighborhoods in Colorado. It's a model for historic preservation, adaptive reuse, transit-oriented development, and more. It's Old Town Arvada.
It's been called a gateway to the Rockies and a link to metropolitan Denver. But Old Town Arvada is that and so much more. With a heritage as rich as its thriving 21st century community, Old Town is truly a great place. And it is not by accident, but quite by design. For Arvadans have poured into investments and infrastructure of Old Town for more than a century. 3 historic districts link Old Town to its legacy as an area that has always offered a sense of place. The Arvada Downtown Historic District boasts the oldest Grange Hall in the state, along with historic churches. Prominent business buildings, which more than a century ago housed car dealerships and a corner confectionery, have transformed into 21st century businesses and retail spaces that rival their bustling yesteryear. Nearby, 2 historic residential districts built in the late 1800s and early 1900s retained their own character and charm, while more contemporary residences have been created to capture the ambiance of the area, with views to historic parks and places located just steps away. Through comprehensive planning and thoughtful design, Old Town not only embraces its past, but is built for its future. It enjoys a walkable environment throughout both its residential and business districts. Bicyclists are welcome thanks to traffic calming designs and enhanced amenities. And while the G-Line commuter rail harkens back to Old Town's early rail history, today it transports travelers anywhere in the world, thanks to its connection to Denver's Union Station and Denver International Airport. The opposite also holds true, that global visitors are drawn in to Old Town, thanks to its charm, intentional mixed-use design, and abundant residential, retail, and entertainment opportunities. Civic and business groups alike share a pride in hosting special events that bring the entire community together and create a thriving cultural oasis. Nature holds the heart of this Colorado community. Tree-lined streets, an extensive trail system, and cherished parks are just part of the story. Green materials, energy-efficient lighting, cool roofs, and rain gardens tie it all together. In so many ways, Old Town truly bridges its yesteryear to its future. Entirely by design, it is a great place to call home.
Old Town Arvada just keeps getting better and better. We talked about these new 5G cell poles earlier in the show, and joining me now is Nancy Kuhn with the Denver Public Works Department. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
How is the City of Denver handling the infrastructure with these new poles?
Well, Denver Public Works is charged with permitting things that go into public spaces. So construction activities, infrastructure, or other encumbrances in areas that are public spaces, we permit them. So in this case, what we do is we receive requests for new cell tower installations, and we review them and permit them based on existing procedures that we have.
How many poles do you think we'll see in Denver?
We've got more than 100 now. It's really hard to know. We know about the poles when we get the requests to put them in.
Is there anything you can do to limit the number of poles you get?
You know, per state and federal law, we have a couple of things that we have to do. One, we have to accept these requests in a non-discriminatory manner, and we have to have procedures in place to process them in batches within 90 days so that the companies aren't having to submit a permit for every single pole. So these are some things that federal and state law have put into place for us. And no, we cannot restrict access to the public right of way, and nor can we limit the number that are in the city based on the law as it is currently.
I understand the City of Denver's kind of become a model for this small cell technology. How so?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have heard from other cities who are interested in the design guidelines that we put in place. So although we can't restrict access to the public right of way, although we can't limit the cell towers, what we can do is provide some guidelines and require the companies to do certain things that will reduce the impact to the public. So for example, we will not allow them to put infrastructure in a way that impedes travel. We also ask them to use existing poles whenever possible. We're also asking them to not obstruct the sight lines of adjacent properties.
Right, you want to minimize the impact.
Minimize impact.
It's a complicated, controversial issue, and we're all trying to figure out our way to navigate through this. So is there anything else you want the public to understand about this technology?
Well, I think really what's key is for them to understand that as a city, we're required to review these applications, we're required to work with these companies, and that we can't limit them. So we're doing our best that we can to just try to provide some guidelines that reduce impact, and we're looking out for the best interests of our residents in how we have created these design guidelines to make it as least impactful as possible.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And now a group of furry neighbors come home. It's a story of hope, success, and the reintroduction of the black-footed ferret in Fort Collins.
Every time we release a ferret into the wild, we celebrate what we have accomplished together in bringing back a species from the brink of extinction. At one time, it was the rarest mammal in North America. Here in northern Colorado, as well as in other prairie lands and zoos across North America, we are a part of a remarkable story of rediscovery, recovery, and reintroduction to welcome a native species back home.
The black-footed ferret was once numerous across the Great Plains, but by the mid part of the 20th century, we thought it might be extinct. A last population was found in northwestern Wyoming. Disease hit that area, and we had to take the animals into captivity to protect the species. At that point in time, we didn't know whether we'd ever be able to reintroduce them into the wild, but we were able to successfully capture and breed them, and now they occur in 8 states, Mexico, and Canada at 30 different sites.
I examined the first 3 or 4 black-footed ferrets that they found dead. I was just shocked because I grew up in Wyoming. I knew or heard that black-footed ferrets were all gone, and then I knew this was an animal that wasn't supposed to be alive anymore.
But we got one more chance. I always said, that strike one is that we farmed up a bunch of the habitat that ferrets needed and prairie dogs needed, and strike two was that we poisoned tens of millions of acres and reduced their habitat that way. And then strike three, which was almost an out, was this old world disease, sylvatic plague, that impacted both ferrets and prairie dogs. But it was only a foul tip. We had another chance, and we were able to salvage some of those animals from that last population, capture, breed them, and provide reintroduction of this species across the West.
One of the key points to establishing recovery for black-footed ferrets in northern Colorado and actually range-wide was the opportunity to set up a facility such as what we have here north of Fort Collins, the Ferret Recovery Center. The issue is that you can breed ferrets in just about any facility that you would like, but the key to this operation is that the ferrets then have an opportunity to become one with their environment before they are actually turned out in the wild.
You know, there's a whole saying out there, and it usually refers to children, but it says it takes a village to raise children. But I think in this case, it also takes a village to raise ferrets. And the village also includes the city of Fort Collins and the local government here, and all the efforts they've done by putting the live ferret display at the Fort Collins Museum of Discovery, to doing environmental education and outreach to schools and classrooms, to actually contributing to ferret recovery by offering up some sites for us to release ferrets on, which is incredible because it's not an easy task.
Bringing black-footed ferrets back to this landscape really posed a challenge to the city of Fort Collins. Never had done something like this before. So one of the things we really needed to develop first was a very purposeful and thoughtful management plan of how we're going to manage not just ferrets, but also black-tailed prairie dogs in this landscape. We wanted to make sure that we maintained a recreation use of the landscape. We wanted to maintain kind of the ranching history on the landscape. We wanted to bring things like bison back to this landscape. And so we needed to be very thoughtful about how many prairie dogs and where those colonies would exist. We worked with our grazing association, both Folsom and Natural Fort, to make sure that anything that we did was not going to have a negative impact on them as well.
This landscape was part of a working ranch, and now the city has continued on with that with the purchase of it. And they feel that, you know, grazing is part of that working landscape. It worked out really well for us when we're approached as how can the ranching community and the reintroduction of the black-footed ferret work hand in hand. And so about 5 years ago, it was a logical choice for us to work together on this reintroduction process.
Sometimes we get questions from folks, you know, why do we have to save everything? And I don't know that we can. Why? Because it is indeed all interconnected. The loss of one particular species, even though it seems to be a very, very small portion, will indeed impact the entire ecosystem.
My son, who's 13, he's growing up learning and listening to me talk about my work and the job and the wildlife that I'm helping to manage. And I think he's really proud that his mom is doing something that's helping save an endangered species.
There's no other city in the western United States where we're trying to recover the endangered black-footed ferret that's done as much for the recovery of this species as the city of Fort Collins. When folks look back and ask themselves, why do we still have the black-footed ferret in future generations, Fort Collins is going to get part of the credit.
It really is about community. It's about people coming together to save a species from extinction. The saying, think globally, act locally, rings true in the ferret's story. Remember, when we save a species, we are saving a part of ourselves.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed learning about some of the happenings in our neighborhoods and communities. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Connected Colorado. Polls for 5G cell service are popping up everywhere. We'll take a look. Plus, a playground that children with disabilities can enjoy. The reintroduction of the black-footed ferret and much more on the next edition of Connected Colorado.